Aloha and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio. I'm your host, Eila Algood, and I am honored today to have as a guest, Nancy Baenziger. She'll be reading a few of her poems, and then we'll follow that up with some talk story to get to know her more as a writer. Welcome, Nancy.
Aloha, Eila, and mahalo nui loa to the Hawaii Writers Guild for this invitation. As a recovering biomedical scientist, I have over the years written more than 50 research papers, but at this point in my life, my poetry is my passion. And I am so grateful for this opportunity to be here in this lush, warm, tropical setting of paradise, and to read 3 of my poems that reflect my growing up experiences in outstate Minnesota, in a context in which sometimes it was 40 degrees below zero. I'll give a little bit of introduction before each poem that explains some of the experiences and thoughts behind it. The first poem deals with my mother's side of the family. Mom was a city girl who was born and raised in Minneapolis. Her father, my maternal grandfather, was a locomotive engineer, and the route that his trains took him right through urban Minneapolis, not that far from where Mom and the rest of her family lived. So when he was out on the tracks, my grandmother would pack up the 5 kids and they would go to a nearby railroad crossing, not that far from their house, right at the time that Grandpa would be driving his locomotive through. They'd all stand there and wave at him, and he would proudly wave back from the window of his locomotive. Grandpa was killed when my mother was 10 years old in a train wreck. What happened was that his locomotive exploded due to negligent maintenance by the company that he was working for. He was severely burned, and it took 3 weeks for him to die. This poem is entitled Grandfather. He kissed his wife and babies goodbye and left on the train for Samarkand, unknowing till the moment of appointment. Years later, we who never knew him giggled at the love letters we found in the attic of her house. My dearest Flora, life without you is dark and dank. We always envisioned him as Teddy Roosevelt, not being close to any sorrows ourselves yet, waiting till growing up to carry out of the attic into sharpened awareness 2 things. 1 brown lock of grandmother's hair, silken to the touch and 3 feet long, and the story of how she took her grief to the basement cellar, weeping in darkness that her children should not see her. My second poem reflects the experience that came after my mom in nursing school met my dad, who was in medical school. They married, and he returned to his town of origin, which was a small town of about 1,000 people in outstate Minnesota, to be the country doctor in the practice of his father, my paternal grandfather, who was also a country doctor. When I was about 6 years old, I attended the Minnesota and other states institution that's known as Vacation Bible School in the summer, where 1 week we little kids went to classes that taught us about the Bible in a local church in the middle of summer. This poem is entitled Time Capture, which is sort of a play on words of the concept of a time capsule. Someone had taken a picture of us kids, and I found the picture many years later in one of the family photograph albums. Perpetual motion, frozen for one instant. Red Rover, oh, who can come over? Pink lemonade pulled down onto black and white from the cricket's buzz, resounding in sunlight against whitewashed church siding, floating on a swell of green lawn. We were coaxed into line for our picture, with spindly knees sprouting from shorts or under dresses tied in bows and sashes. A stranger's face hanging back among the rest in the back row, wrapped in a tattered print silk scarf, nodded to one side on a small shoulder. The magic cloak of invisibility, the magic carpet of transport to elsewhere. Even then, the dreamer, the gypsy queen. My third poem describes what it is like to grow up in a small town of 1,000 people and be very aware of how the people who come from the big city feel about small towns and those of us who live there. It's describing a town that actually exists. It's called Hoople, North Dakota. And it was made famous by the composer Peter Schickele, also known as, who discovered the lost manuscripts of P.D.Q. Bach, and was very proud to be the only member of the music department of the University of Southern North Dakota at Hoople. The people from Hoople can never live it down. The snickers, the sly winks, the evanescent frown. How little they all know. They'll never even try to journey out to Hoople, where prairie melds with sky. Lush grass grows in communion with salt-washed whitened scars and roads that stretch forever, devoid of passing cars. The silence would scare them. The cricket's dreaming cry is best left to lonely, silent watchers such as I.
Thank you for sharing your poetry with us. And when I say us, I mean me and the audience that will be watching this. One of the things I noticed is you are quite the storyteller. Is that something that you have considered yourself throughout your life?
Other people considered it long before I did. My aunt, who was my dad's sister, so she was the relative of the family that was in the small town, although she didn't live there. After she visited, she described me at how cute the whole family, most of the family, thought it was that I would be sitting up in my crib at 2 o'clock in the morning, talking away, telling myself a story.
Aww.
And in fact, someone had given me some school books, and of course I couldn't read, but I would hold the books open and just tell a story. Yeah, so I've tended to think of my really not necessarily consciously thinking of myself as a storyteller, but I was writing, for instance, a bit of poetry, short stories, as well as scientific, what I'd call scientific journalism in high school. My senior paper told the story of the discovery of DNA structure.
Oh, nice.
My high school paper in English. It is only that I've more when I have been teaching medical students and having the opportunity to present lectures. I would always open my lectures with a story, with a patient, a clinical case. Mm-hmm. For example, I gave lectures on human blood. That's one of the topics I taught the first-year medical students. And the case I presented was the Iceman. the guy they found in the glacier
Yeah.
in Austria, because I wove through his story all of the science of the different types of cells that are in blood. Not only that, but how they came to clarify that he had been murdered. He was a murder victim.
Mhm.
So, and I always ended the lecture describing that as the world's coldest cold case. And that's the lecture, I still hear about that from students. And when a few of the students went to Europe, they sent me a postcard from Bolzano, Italy, where the Iceman Museum is.
Mhm.
So I always did that.
I
The
imagine that
circumstance,
I was going to say, I imagine that your students probably learned a lot through your stories, because I know as someone who has listened to lectures, I start to glaze over pretty early on, just taking in information. So it sounds like you were able to weave it together into with the story, so that they didn't even know that they were learning the information that you were giving them in that story.
right. As I progressed in my career, in which was a quintessential hostile environment, I came to be wondering for myself where my resilience and stubbornness in sticking with it
Uh-huh.
was coming from. I thought this has to be coming from somewhere. And when I finally figured out where it had come from, it turned out that the storytelling came with it. I am part of a not very well recognized ethnic group called the Sami, the reindeer people in the Scandinavian High Arctic,
Yes, I'm
also called
familiar with that.
Lapland.
Yep, I know about those
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah. Well, one of my fellow poets here on the Big Island, Ku'ule Keakealani, has given me the name Reindeer Auntie. And this is a group of people that migrated to the United States. They were not popular in their homeland of Scandinavia. They were an oppressed minority there. And when they came to the US, they hid their identity. For example, my family basically passed for Norwegian,
Right.
but we somehow knew, well, you know, we had some Norwegian stuff in there, some Finnish, and maybe some Swedish. And it turned out that when I started, for one thing, Mom explained to me that where the town where some of them had come from was called Alta, and that some of them had worked in a copper mine in the town Kofjord. And when I finally looked at a map and saw how far north of the Arctic Circle those were, and then began just seeing pictures of Sami people on the internet, all of whom look like all of my relatives. And this is something that recently discovered Sami saying, you know, I've found there are all these people who look like me. And
have you written any, have you done any writing about that? About about those people, whether fiction or nonfiction?
It's a poem. I read it. Actually, I read it here on the Big Island at what used to be Living Arts Gallery in Javi, right next to
right here in Javi, up the road from me. Yes,
right next to Sushi Rock. Jacques and I went. They had the gal who was there before, Sky School.
Mary Sky, yes.
Mary Sky Schoolcraft would have some, like every once in a while, an arts evening at the gallery. And so Jacques and I went to dinner at Sushi Rock, and then I went, and the poem I read there is called Doji. It's a bit longer, and the reason I didn't choose to do that one here is that it actually benefits from a visual art, which is the picture of a little purse, a little bag made out of what would have been a flour bag. But doji is the Sami word for what you'd call arts and crafts, craft making. And so they make these beautiful band woven items, especially during the winter when it's dark
Mhm.
all the time for
Right.
2 months.
Right.
And so, but it is the bag made out of a flour sack that's telling its story, and it's telling the story of coming to the United States and a heritage that has been hidden. I'm also still in my in-brain incubation period. Is an article I'm planning to write about the discovery of a hidden, long buried heritage.
Mhm. Sounds wonderful. And so you were a professor for many years. Were you
Right.
doing creative writing then, or was most of your writing academic?
I wrote a lot of poetry in like the mid to late 70s,
Mhm.
and it sat untouched, it sat in paper form for decades. And I have been writing some kind of off and on. I'm writing more, but I do, as I say, give credit to Jacques, who says, you've got to get this together. So right now I have one major collection that I'm working on, planning to self-publish. So it's a book that's called Protagonists. And all 3 poems that I just read today will be in Protagonists. And also there's 3 other books that I'm, it's like dealing cards. I put out, figure out the ones I've already written, the new ones, where did they fit? The other 3 will feature some of Jacques' photography as well.
Now,
But
some of the writers I've spoken to, and I do this also, can be inspired by photography. Like they'll either see a photograph of something or they take a photograph, but they'll write from that photograph what that inspires them in their poetry. Would you say you do it that way, or you match up a photo later that might work with you?
for me, it's more matching a photo because from his inspiration, because for me, the poetry, when I was reading my poetry for the Hawaii Writers Guild before, I explained to Joy Fisher that for me, the poetry, it's kind of like a migraine coming on.
Oh, no.
It just, yeah, it just appears.
Yeah.
Or listening to Tamara Williams the other day, for me, it kind of unspools or coalesces.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I do.
You were actually inspired in your own writing by listening to her poetry, Tamara's poetry.
Yeah, well, and yeah, it's very much the same process
Yeah.
that, yeah, and so the inspiration sometimes comes from, life experiences or, but it just pops up.
And it wants to be written. It sounds like it's time to get the paper out. This one wants to come out.
Right.
Yes. And
Right. And it's just like her. A certain amount of it gets done at 2 and 3 in the morning, and that's always been the case. And that was, since I was 2 years old, sitting in the crib, storytelling. In my case, however, speaking as a neurobiologist, though, I can say that there's a solid biological base for that. I'm one of the people in the world who are called phase delayed. We are 4 hours behind the rest of the world, in that what some of our peak activity is 2 to 3 in the morning, and my most restful sleep comes between 7 a.m. and about noon. And Jacques is over here laughing because, he's an lark up at 6 to go paddling. But so there is a lot of it that just appears then.
Well, there's something there's something I have always found very special about the middle of the night like that. It's such a quiet time. Phones aren't ringing. Nobody's asking for anything. And back when I was raising children, every once in a while, I just stay up till 3 in the morning because I could do things that I could never do in the busyness of a day, right? So
Right, right.
there is an energy, I think, about that time of the night.
Absolutely,
It speaks
yeah.
to a lot of people, and especially those creative juices kind of bubble up at that hour.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think a lot, for me, an additional element besides storytelling and coalescing is that another thing that surrounded my life was music. My family, none of us were really professional musicians, but my dad played violin and saxophone, and I played saxophone and recorder, and I have a harpsichord in Hood River. And so, and singing, choral singing. So for me, there's a strong element of, it's like making music
Yeah.
with the words.
Yes, and I understand that. I'm a radio DJ here in Hawi. Music is very important to me. All kinds of genres create different moods and different feelings and evoke different thoughts and ideas. So
right.
Glad you brought that in. I don't know that I've had a singer-songwriter as a guest, but not too many people bring that up, how the connection with music.
Well, when Jacques and I both have, in fact, we sort of met through music because we were both singers. And we have a shared interest in early music, which when people hear that, they say, oh, you mean before Elvis? But it's really medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque music. So like we groove on Gregorian. Yes, and Gregorian chant, and so there's something really haunting about that music and the tonalities of that. So
you know, that's funny you say that, because as a teenager, I was drawn to harpsichord music. I was the only kid anywhere where I grew up in New York playing a record with harpsichord music that I borrowed from the library. Right. And I often wondered if it was a throwback to another lifetime or something, because there is a certain vibe about it that's different, right?
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to talk with you more another time about that, because
yes. Let me ask
one of the things
let me ask you a couple more writing questions. There's so many processes with writing, from idea to finished product, right? Is there one aspect of that you like the least in that?
I would say I have been trying to compile, getting it all together at the end is my weakest link.
So putting it together in a book is not your fun. Yeah. It's not a fun job for you.
Well, yeah, I think it was, I'd call it more an energy barrier than, active dislike, but, and I always write a pen and paper first, and then put that into Word, and that's why we have a lot of paper around.
Yeah. So I talk about this often in my writers groups, because I had read that it uses a different part of the brain, and you're into you taught neurobiology. Can you say anything about that? Is that something you would know about?
I would like to learn more about that. I think you're absolutely right, that it's a part of the process that if, for me, it would be short-circuiting to go on screen first, at least for poetry, and even for the 3 murder mysteries that I'm writing right now. Wow. Some of that, or something that I can go directly to screen now is essays. One of the other things I do for writing is I write blog posts. I write a column called Page News and Views for we have a women homeowners group here at Mauna Lani called Nalani Wahine. And we have a blog online, and I write something for that. And I also write the newsletter for our homeowners association in Hood River. And both of those I can go directly to screen, but certainly not for poetry, and not necessarily for more extended writing.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that.
But I'll look into that and get back to you.
Yes, yes. What would you say is your favorite part of the process of writing?
Feeling it spooling out,
Okay.
feeling it, I feel it coming on, and it just, I'm hearing it in my head as it's appearing. And I may tinker with the wording a little bit, but it's not that I have to pound away at it. It's more like, I guess, molding clay. I keep hauling in all sorts of other artistic references.
Well, it helps. It's another, you're bringing a visual into it, like you brought the music into it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Right.
Well, Nancy, I want to thank you for being on the show today. And I want to let people know, if they'd like to know more about the Hawaii Writers Guild, you can go to the website, hawaiiwritersguild.com. There's also a Facebook page, Hawaii Writers Guild. So until next time, aloha, everyone.
Aloha and thank you. Mahalo.